It was a pretty lukewarm response when it comes to some of these key nations, India, Indonesia, as well as Brazil, on the topic of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, the G7 is pretty much in unison on its response, and it's been eloquated in the communiques, whether at the finance ministers meeting, the foreign ministers meeting of the G7, and now at the leaders meeting, essentially that they condemn Russia's quote-unquote illegal war in Ukraine. So the G7 in itself is in unison. But again, Prime Minister Kishida, as the host of the G7 summit in Hiroshima over the weekend, did invite those so-called global South nations, whether it's Brazil, India, Indonesia, Vietnam was also, as you can see on your screen here, so-called middle ground countries, and I'm not going to put Australia necessarily in that middle ground country list, but again, middle ground countries that have not necessarily taken specific sides, condemning Russia or supporting Ukraine and the like. So this opportunity was for the G7 to go broaden their unison and bring in these other nations to support the condemnation of Russia. Well, I'm not saying it backfired by bringing in Zelensky. I mean, Zelensky took the opportunity. He flew from the Arab League summit in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to Hiroshima late Saturday and spent most of Sunday either, meeting directly with G7 leaders as well as those other middle ground countries. He met with Modi. He met with Jokowi. He did not meet with Lula da Silva, though. Those efforts to get those two gentlemen together in a room failed at the last minute. Brazilian officials telling us, and I was there at the G7 as well, were telling us that, some of the Brazilian delegation felt that it was a bit of a trap to have Zelensky there and to essentially force a meeting between Lula da Silva and Zelensky because many, outside of the G7, not many, but some nations feel that the G7 has taken a side, and that is not helping towards finding a peaceful solution in Ukraine.
So, Steve, all your interviews, all your conversations on the side, how do you gauge what the G7 nations are feeling, or what the invited attendees from the Global South are what is their feeling about this push to get them to come over, pull away from Russia, pull away from China, and be on board with us?
Sure. Well, I think the people that we spoke to that are within the G7 felt that there seems to have been some movement, especially with Zelensky arriving on Sunday, and it did change the dynamic, obviously. They had the opportunity to meet face-to-face with Zelensky, and some, like in the German delegation and others, felt that there was a bit of a move from those so-called middle ground countries that I just talked about to have a little bit more alignment, if you will. But again, there's still a hesitancy. India is one key country. Obviously, they are in the Quad security agreement with the United States, Australia, Japan. But at the same time, they buy the bulk of their military weapons from Russia. Also, Jokowi of Indonesia has been fairly middle of the road. He wants to find a peaceful solution rather than taking sides. And Lula da Silva, we know his comments as well, similar to Jokowi's. Did this move the needle, having Zelensky right there within the other G7 ministers? It didn't move the needle on that because they're all in unison. And we're not necessarily feeling that those Global South key countries, Brazil, Indonesia, India, which make up 1/4 of the world's population, whether this move backfired or moved the needle. We have to see.